So, earlier today we talked about Huineng. Dude couldn't even read or write, but when he showed up at Dongchan Temple in Huangmei County, Master Hongren found something special in Huineng, though his answer, you know what I mean. But instead of immediately taking him on as a student, Master Hongren held back because he was worried about someone messing with Huineng. The big question at Dongchan Temple was who should get the Dharma Robe. Master Hongren was getting up there in age, and passing on the Dharma Robe was a whole inheritance thing. Back in the Tang dynasty, the government strongly supported Buddhism, and every head monk was also a big shot with lots of land. So, handing over the Dharma Robe was like passing on the temple's property too. And that's when things got messy in the temples. Master Hongren was a wise dude. He told Huineng, I'm not gonna officially take you as a student, but I'm not kicking you out either. Go work in the rice hulling room. Sending him off to the rice hulling room was the best way to look out for Huineng. So, earlier I mentioned that Master Hongren finally decided to pass on the Dharma Robe. He gathered all the disciples and said, life and death, they're serious stuff. You've been studying Buddhism with me, but all you care about is getting some good karma. You're not trying to escape the suffering of life and death. If you're still clueless about your true nature, how the heck can the Buddha save you? He wasn't happy with them. Each of you, write me a verse to show what you've got. He wanted them to write these poetic verses, you know. It was like a test. After that, the disciples went back to their rooms and thought, should we really bother writing these verses? Eventually, they all agreed without saying it out loud that there was no point in doing it. They figured our master clearly favors Shenxiu, having made him his top disciple. If we also write verses, it's like competing with him. If he ends up getting the Dharma Robe in the future, we won't get good consequences. So, everyone decided not to write the verses. Shenxiu was also torn. He thought, if he doesn't write the verse, there's no way he'll get the Dharma Robe. But if he writes it and the master doesn't like it, he'll not only miss out on the Dharma Robe, but he'll also lose respect from the other disciples. It was a tough choice, a real dilemma. But in the end, he came up with a smart plan. He decided to write the verse, but without putting his name on it. He'd sneak into the room in the middle of the night and write it on the wall. If the master sees it and praises it, he'll own up to it. But if the master criticizes it, he'll stay quiet and not say a word. His verse is pretty well known. The body is a Bodhi tree, the mind a clear mirror bright, diligently polish it lest it should gather dust. Basically, we shouldn't just see our bodies as flesh and bones, but as something more profound, like the Bodhi tree. That's the first line. See, Shakyamuni found enlightenment under a Bodhi tree, so Bodhi became a symbol of wisdom. The second line goes, the mind a clear mirror bright. Our minds are naturally pure, like a shiny mirror. But hey, once we enter this world, it's full of dust and troubles, right? Can't avoid getting a little dirty. So what do? Keep polishing it constantly, keep wiping away the dirt. Don't let it get all dusty and messed up. When Master Hongren saw it, he knew deep down that Shenxiu was the one who wrote it. He understood how far his disciple had come in his practice. So he gathered all the disciples and said, all right, starting today, y'all gotta recite this verse every single day. It's gonna do wonders for your journey. Then, in private, Master Hongren called Shenxiu into his room and asked, did you write this verse? Shenxiu nodded and said, yeah, it was me. Master Hongren wasn't satisfied and told him, your verse shows that you haven't fully grasped your true nature yet. You're still on the outside, not inside the gate. Write me another verse, let's see what you got. He wanted Shenxiu to come up with a new verse. But in the following days, Shenxiu pondered hard, but he just couldn't come up with a second one. All the disciples were chanting Shenxiu's verse, and Huineng happened to overhear them. He was busy working in the rice pounder room at the time. Curious, he asked a young monk, "What's everyone reciting?" The young monk replied, "Our master told us to chant this verse by Shenxiu every day. It's really good for our practice, you know." Huineng then said, "I can't read, can you recite it to me?" The young monk recited the verse for him. When he finished, Huineng declared, "Now it's my turn to compose one." One of the nearby monks chuckled and teased, "You, a menial laborer, writing verses? Just go back to pounding rice in the pounder room." He looked down on Huineng. Huineng immediately responded, "Never underestimate beginners or belittle others. It leads to endless wrongdoing." He upped the stakes. The person who laughed felt a bit uneasy. Huineng continued, "Even the most average Joe can be super wise, and the smartest of the smart might not have a clue." That person became even more flustered. Later on, the Chinese came up with a saying, right? "The humble are the most intelligent, and the noble are the most foolish." Where did that come from? It originated from Huineng's words. The lowly, who are considered the lowest, may possess great wisdom, while the exalted, who hold high positions, may lack it. Later, Huineng said, "I can't write, can you help me put my verse on that wall?" That person replied, "Go ahead and recite it first." Huineng recited, "The Bodhi tree ain't really a tree, and the mirror ain't really a mirror. There's nothing fundamentally there, so where can dust gather?" When the person heard this, they realized that Huineng had reached a high level of understanding, but still refused to help him write. They told Huineng, "If you want me to write it on the wall for you, there's a condition." "What's the condition?" "Once you receive the Dharma Robe, you gotta come and enlighten me first." Huineng agreed readily. Finally, the person helped Huineng write the verse on the wall. Master Hongren saw this, and all the disciples were there. Master Hongren took off one of his shoes and used it to erase Huineng's verse from the wall, saying, "But the original mind remains unseen." He still hadn't seen anything. Of course, this was to keep protecting Huineng. The disciples saw that even their master didn't appreciate his verse, so Huineng stayed safe. But this statement was still true. Master Hongren didn't lie, the Buddhist tradition doesn't allow falsehood. Huineng's verse showed a higher level of understanding than Shenxiu's, but he hadn't reached enlightenment yet. In other words, he hadn't realized his true nature and become a Buddha yet. Let's break down the difference between these two verses real quick, and then we'll explain why Huineng didn't get it either. Huineng's verse shows a deeper understanding than Shenxiu's, right? What makes it better? So, what's wrong with Shenxiu's verse? He claims we have a pure heart, but once we enter this world, it's easy to get all dusty. So, what's this cultivation thing he's talking about? Shenxiu tried to explain it with his verse, right? What's cultivation all about? It's like constantly dusting ourselves off. What's that mean? It means always keeping our heart separate from the outside world, maintaining that distance. Why do we need that separation? 'Cause the outside world is full of temptations. In a way, he set up a conflict between the heart and afflictions, but that's not right. We already discussed this earlier, but where do afflictions come from? They come from our heart. And where does wisdom come from? Same place, our heart. So, wisdom and afflictions are opposites, huh? But they both come from the same source, the heart. How can you pit them against each other and create some binary opposition? That's one of the mistakes. But here's the thing, that's not the right approach. When he says we should reject afflictions, what does that even mean? It means shutting out the struggles of other people and only focusing on fixing ourselves. That's what they call Hinayana Buddhism. But that's not what Shakyamuni taught us. True wisdom is about having great compassion. Without compassion, there's no real wisdom. So, how can we just ignore the afflictions of others? We need to embrace their struggles as our own and recognize their faults as our own faults too. That's what Mahayana Buddhism is all about. These are the two deficiencies in Shenxiu's understanding. So, I was talking about something earlier. You know how in psychology they came up with this IQ test to measure our intelligence, right? But can we measure our inherent abilities? Can we measure wisdom? Definitely not, right? Measuring things is all scientific stuff. Wisdom isn't something you can put a number on, but can we still make judgments? Yeah, we can. Let's say you have a 3-year-old kid who's just starting to explore the world. Imagine they're walking down a street in Shanghai and they see a scavenger rummaging through a garbage bin, filled with all kinds of junk. This scavenger finds some rotten food that someone else threw away, picks it up, and starts eating it because he is hungry. Your child sees this and can't help but cry, then asks you to give some money to the scavenger. If your 3-year-old is like that, you can be sure they have a compassionate nature. Wisdom is all about compassion, not just being smart, you know? Being too clever isn't always a good thing. Of course, it's okay to be clever, but having wisdom is what really matters. Being clever without wisdom is pretty scary. We judge wisdom based on compassion because they go hand in hand. When your heart expands, you break down the barriers between people, right? Remember what I was talking about earlier, breaking down those barriers. When your heart is open and compassionate, how can it not be wise? That's just something to think about on the side. Huineng's verse was considered better than Shenxiu's, but Master Hongren said he hadn't fully grasped his essence yet. Huineng's verses directly addressed the flaws in Shenxiu's verses, which is like hitting back. The Bodhi tree ain't really a tree, and the mirror ain't really a stand. There's nothing fundamentally there, so where can dust gather? With these words, he aimed to break down dualistic ideas and remove the conflict between the heart and the external world. But does that mean there's nothing left once these concepts are gone? Something does remain, but Huineng wasn't aware of it at that time. So, what does his verse actually mean? It captures the essence of the first 4 words of the Diamond Sutra, to have no fixed idea. It means not holding on to your own pure mind as if it's a fixed dwelling place. But don't even take your own inherently pure mind as something to dwell upon. That would be grasping at the void, which is also a kind of attachment. Some people are really firm in their principles, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? They know what they love and hate, what's clean and dirty. They keep themselves pure and won't tolerate any impurities. But it can become unhealthy, like being too attached to clarity. You know the lotus flower is a symbol in Buddhism, right? Guess where it grows? In the muddy soil. And where does wisdom come from? It comes from dealing with troubles and problems. If there were no problems in the world, why would we need wisdom? That's why we need to go one step further. Huineng got it right, you know? The Bodhi tree ain't really a tree, and the mirror ain't really a stand. Those first 4 words are important, to have no fixed idea. But after dwelling nowhere, you shouldn't just hang around in that empty state. If you cling to emptiness, it becomes another problem. You cannot cling to the void. That's what they call emptiness within emptiness. Come back to the human world, get back in the game. In Zen, what's the ultimate goal of practice? It's like reaching the top of a 100-foot pole, right? What more is there to achieve? Go higher. But don't try explaining this to foreigners, they'll find it weird. Imagine you're on the top of a tall bamboo pole, like 100 feet tall. You've already reached the top, so how can you go any further? It sounds crazy. Zen teachings like to use these kinds of sayings to motivate us. Reaching the top of a 100-foot pole, going beyond that, how do we do it? By getting back to everyday life. At that time, Huineng hadn't fully realized his inner self yet. It was actually those last 4 words that got him thinking, yet give rise to the mind. But he was so close to enlightenment, like on the edge of it. If Shenxiu was still outside the gate, then where was Huineng? He was already standing right at the threshold, just 1 step away from entering. After Master Hongren saw Huineng's verse, he made a move and wiped it off with his shoe. This gesture carries a deep meaning in Zen. Just think about it, what kind of meaning could it be? Huineng's verse talks about the state of emptiness, right? Can we just stay in that emptiness forever? By wiping it away, it's like emptying the emptiness once again, completely erasing it. He said empty, right? You empty the emptiness one more time, it's called emptiness within emptiness, that's what wiping it away means. This action itself captures the very essence of Zen.